I'm Judy Stiles. Thank you for joining us this week on Newsmakers. We're continuing our look at area attractions, and today we're focusing on Joplin, the Joplin Museum Complex, and the Historical and Mineral Museum area. And joining me, we have Chris Wiseman. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
This is a summer that a lot of people on tourists and visiting. Have you been seeing a lot of visitors coming to the museum?
We have the summer months are usually our busiest months, and we do get probably about a third of our traffic comes from out of state traveling through. So these are the months when you have the most travelers on the road too. So we do see a big uptick in people. Great.
Well, I know that you have a special exhibit this summer tying into World War II.
We do. We're doing an exhibit on the 75th anniversary of D-Day, and it goes from the beach landing all the way through to the liberation of Paris. The different subjects that are covered in the exhibit, along with some original artifacts, and where we couldn't find originals, we also have some reproductions just so people can see the kind of material culture that was used at that time.
Are a lot of these artifacts tied into local people, local history as well?
We have a few that are from local people. Most of them we've been having to try and find piecemeal. We're a little bit late to the collecting of World War II artifacts. It seemed like the first thing that was kind of brought up when I went into a place and said I'm looking for something for D-Day, and they said, well, that was 75 years ago. Yeah, that's kind of the point. That's why I want to have some of this stuff.
For the museum, right, and tying it together. Well, I know that for our viewers, we have some things you've brought with you today.
Yeah, I have some.
We'll talk about some of the items that you have. You have a display in front of us.
The display shows some of the different things that would have been used by an infantryman during the D-Day invasion. Some of it being very, very basic equipment. We have his helmet, a weapon. The weapon is a Thompson submachine gun, which would have more than likely been used by an airborne trooper. One of the more interesting artifacts is the big canvas belt in the center. That's a life belt. And since this was an amphibious assault, every soldier was given this to help support their weight as they waded to shore. Unfortunately, the term belt kind of threw some soldiers, and where it's supposed to be worn is right under the armpits.
Like a life preserver.
Yes, exactly. And but many soldiers would wear it right around their waist, and unfortunately, with all the gear they were carrying, they would turn upside down. And there were many soldiers who actually drowned before they even got to the beach because of improperly wearing the life belt.
How many pounds of gear were they wearing when they hit the shore?
You're probably carrying about 50 to 60 pounds of gear. Excuse me. We have several stories that come in about paratroopers loading up into the planes to be taken over and dropped off over France. And these guys would have been 120, 140 pounds. Maybe, you know, these are kids, 18 years old kids, and they'd be carrying almost that much weight on them with their parachutes, all the gear they had, the personal items that they wanted to carry with them once they got into combat.
Wow! So not only the challenge of let's get there, but you have to carry everything with you.
Exactly, because you don't know the next time you're going to have a meal. The number one thing we see reference to, with especially among the paratroopers, is stashing cigarettes in all their pockets. Any gear they could get rid of, they would get rid of so that they could put a carton of cigarettes there. And we have one story about a gentleman who put 4 of the big cartons, 20 cigarettes in a carton, down his pants leg. Because the boots are bloused, so it acts like a pocket. And then, of course, he lands in a lake. And he lost all of that. But you didn't know what was going to happen tomorrow, so you had to make sure that you had the equipment and the things that you needed so that you could face tomorrow.
Now, I know one of the items you have on the table is a little box. I guess it's basically some of the rations.
It's a little box. That's called a K ration, and that would have had all of the food that the soldiers were given. And American soldiers were kind of the envy of the world for the amount of food and the type of food that they got in their rations. Every ration included a chocolate bar or some kind of candy. A lot of the candy from your youth, like Lifesavers and M&Ms, really kind of got established in the mind of American people because it was part of these rations that were given out.
So they're probably a way to give them a sugar boost or energy boost.
Exactly. Right. And these are only meant to be used for a certain number of days. You're supposed to eventually get to have a real meal at some point. And there was also one called a C ration, which is a little canned tins of things, and it's more like an emergency snack that you can easily carry. We have one on display at the museum. We have a tin of crackers that's open now, that is 75 years old, and there's a little tin of peanut butter with it too. And according to military standards, it's still considered edible. And I've been trying to get people to take a taste of it at the museum, but
try those crackers.
I've had no takers so far. So,
but it's lasted throughout the years. So
yes, it has. Really and you look at the crackers; they just look pristine. Wow. I don't know what they taste like, but they look pretty good.
So they built them well. And when you think about the significance of D-Day, you know, the American troops, the Allies coming ashore with all of this gear, just the challenge of carrying all that ashore as well as being shot at and everything happening.
It's one of those things. There have been a twofold eye-opening as I've done the research for this exhibit. One is what the men went through just as far as getting the job done. With the benefit of hindsight, looking back, this really should have been impossible. This should not have worked at all. And somehow those guys just did it. You know, they got onto the beaches. They everything that could go wrong, that should have stopped us in our tracks, for some reason didn't. And it's just been amazing to me. And on the opening day of the exhibit, I had the honor of meeting a gentleman who was actually on Omaha Beach. And I believe he's the last living person in the 4 states area who was a part of the D-Day campaign. So at the youngest, he'd be 93. And you know, I was talking to him, and I said, you know, I'm amazed at what you did. And it's over the years, I've talked to many veterans who have been in different things, and it's always amazed me the humbleness. And he just said, "Oh, I was just doing my job. You know, it's what we had to do." And he didn't think it was anything special at all. But I mean, he's so far beyond to here. I mean, he literally helped do the impossible. The other thing that was a real eye-opener is just the whole horrible sadness of all the lives lost. You know, the books and stuff tend to glorify one side of it, but you start seeing, while doing the research, I was talking earlier about a paratrooper who was using the clickers. And as you go through the different books, they introduce different people, historical figures to you. And it's just sad. You see these people, and then, you know, 2 weeks later, this person was dead. You know, this person died landing on the beach. It's just, it's horrible that had to happen to a generation. But if you think about how the world would be now if they had not made that sacrifice.
Of course, you mentioned that there are fewer and fewer World War II veterans around today.
Much.
So, the appreciation for people who maybe there aren't that many left to tell us those stories.
No, they're not, and that's one of the reasons that I was really excited to get the chance to do this exhibit, because I think it's a story that needs to be told again and again. And as we get further from it, we tend to think of things in the past as being very simplistic. And you know, that the way things are today, we don't understand why they are the things they are today. And it gets overused a lot in literature, but D-Day was a real turning point in history. It could have gone either way. And through some miracle, it went the way that led to the lives that we have today.
Do you find a lot of family members who might say, my grandpa was in World War II, and they kind of bring back some memories or things that people talk about?
Yes, we do. And that would probably be the bulk of people who are coming to see the exhibit. And I think a lot of people just want to have an opportunity to tell a story about their grandfather or their ancestor and have someone listen, and I'm more than happy to do that. I mean, it's an honor to learn all this stuff.
Now you have a clicker with you, and I don't know if the viewers can see it, but explain this. I mean, some people may have heard about it, but this, you mentioned the paratroopers. This
is actually a toy, and I believe the original was made by Acme Toy Company. And the Allies figured out they needed to have a very quick way to identify troops when they landed. Now, the first wave that went in would have been paratroopers. And it's kind of, since this was a secret mission, you can't just say, "Hey, Bob, is that you?" in the bushes. So these toys, or clickers, were given to each of the troops. And they actually totally emptied the toy warehouse. They were importing these, and you know, thousands of these were used on the battlefield. when you landed and got all your gear together, the airborne troops would do what was called rolling up the line. The first person and the last person would move towards the center, and everyone would move towards the center point.
Gather all the groups together.
And as you're doing that, you're trying to identify who's a friend and who's a foe. So the query is, if you saw someone in the bushes you didn't know, is you'd make 1 click. And if they were a friend, the answer was supposed to be 2 clicks. Well, it didn't take long for the Germans to kind of figure out that elaborate code, but it gave us enough of a edge in the early hours that we were able to get some of the troops together, and this all through the use of a little brass
piece of toy. And of course, they paratrooped. It was dark still when they came in.
Yes, they came in before dawn.
Right. So you couldn't see that person on the other side of the hedgerow or anything.
Not at all. And they had verbal call signs too, like flash and thunder. The British used, I think it was ham and jam, which is named after a sandwich that's supposed to be a vile concoction of ham and jelly in England. And that's something too. As you go through this, D-Day is not solely an American campaign.
Talk about the Allies.
I mean, we had the English, we had the French forces, we had soldiers from Norway who were fighting, and the same is actually true on the other side too. One of the things that I found fascinating is that after the D-Day invasion, as they were going through the prisoners, the German prisoners that they'd captured, they had 2 that they couldn't understand. And so they finally found an interpreter, and these guys were from Korea, 2 soldiers from Korea, who evidently had been captured by the Russians, and then given the choice, go to a concentration camp or fight for the Russians, and then were captured by the Germans and given the same deal, fight for us or, cool your heels in a prison. So what's interesting is that the United States paid to send these guys back home, where more than likely they ended up fighting in the Korean War.
Back 10 years later, they're fighting against them again, and so forth. So a lot of interesting ties in the history. It sounds like it was an interesting research project for you.
It was. This exhibit has literally been a year in the making, from accumulating the artifacts to doing the research for all the different labels that we have. And
is there a lot written out there? I mean, as far as historical archives, as well as these personal stories where people have written their stories?
There is, and it is a task to wade through everything, but there are several incredible sources out there that give you glimpses into the lives of the soldiers. And I'm more interested in the life of the everyday soldier, not so much what all the commanders and stuff are doing.
And do you find that people want to see that human side through the life of a soldier versus a map showing you the battle went here and the battle went there?
Yeah, and you're kind of going up against the convention that there is when you talk about things, like you have to show a map. And all of our labels do have a map, because it's very hard to understand what's going on if you don't know where things are. But yeah, we do try and focus more on what the people were going through, what the objective was that they had to do for this phase of the invasion, and what the consequences were, either success or failure.
Right, and so the risks they were facing going into each of those. Of course, World War II is such a massive moment in history. This was just the D-Day. Do you have plans for future with, 75th
Well, we're always looking for new things to do exhibits on. And one of the things that would be helpful is if we had people who would bring items and artifacts to us so we can see what kind of story we can build. We do not have a large collection of World War II items. The museum, kind of a problem that everyone faces today, is no one thinks that what's happening in their lives is historical, that we don't need to preserve it. But you get down the road, once again, that gift of hindsight 20 years ago, I should have saved that. Like as a young boy growing up, how many comic books I threw away, and people say, oh, if you'd kept that one, you'd be. We don't have that hindsight, but we don't think what's happening to us is significant, and it is. So, if we have people who have artifacts or family stories about different aspects of the war, I would love to hear them. I'd love to see the items, and if there's something that you could donate or loan to the museum, we can use it in a possible upcoming exhibit. Right.
Well, you talk about the different generations and the World War II veterans passing off. You may have more and more families who are finding something that Grandpa had or something like that.
We are, and we had one lady bring some stuff in, and I started to get the form out for her, and she goes, no, I don't want to sign anything. Well, she had a Nazi hat and a Nazi armband and some other stuff, and she she understands the historical significance of it, but she didn't want to be associated with anyone.
So it's kind of an anonymous gift. Here's something they want to put in there. So anyone who's watching, they have something or they find out about something, they can contact you and you'll work with them and tie
Yeah, I'm pretty much at the museum all the time. So.
So these special exhibits are something you're going to continue to try to do throughout the years.
We do multiple exhibits. We've been pushing to do these special exhibits for the past couple of years since I've taken over as director of the museum. Our first, I can't remember our first one. We've done an exhibit on the Titanic.
Right, I remember the Titanic.
We've done an exhibit on Abraham Lincoln. Both of those were through Alan Shirley's collections. This D-Day exhibit is our most recent one, and we're looking at next summer possibly doing something on NASA's exploration of space, as this year is the start of, I believe next week or the week after is the Apollo landing, and then after that is an anniversary of the Voyager probe. And we have some actual negatives of images from the moon landing that we're working on getting made into a presentation. And once again, this is all due to the fabulous collection of Alan Shirley. And he actually has a copy of the golden record that was put on Voyager to communicate to any possible species that would, and is it some trillions of miles away from us now. But it's just some little things that to one, commemorate. We're going to try and have those things up for the actual anniversaries. And then just a little teaser for the exhibit that's will be coming probably next summer.
Right. Well, in addition to the special exhibits, of course, you have some year-round displays, and then we have some video. And I think while we talk now, if we could roll some of that video, people can see to kind of just maybe recognize what they've seen before. Maybe if they haven't, let them recognize what's at the museum. So obviously outside the building.
We are, and the museum actually is an original Route 66 roadside attraction. The museum has been there for, I think this is our 88th year. We have the large collections of mine machinery that were used in bringing out ore from the mines, but we still sit right off of Route 66 where we originally were.
And you have some actually ore samples there.
We do, and our samples really rival for tri-state district stuff, anything you can find, be it in the Smithsonian or anywhere.
And then this tells some of the history, tying in, we saw briefly some of the mining history as well. Right?
Yes, yeah, and that's the whole reason that Joplin exists. I mean, we wouldn't be here at all if it wasn't for the lead and zinc that was discovered. This was just open farmland before that.
Now we're seeing a little bit of the World War II.
The World War II. This is some of the display that we have going on, showing the different artifacts, some of the different uniforms. Here's the meal ration I was talking about earlier. We've got some German artifacts. Most of the German stuff, quite honestly, is reproduction. It's very, very hard to find unless you have very, very deep pockets.
Right, I mentioned that there's a whole market of World War II memorabilia.
Yes, there is. And this is Alan's father here.
Oh, okay.
And
the star that went into the window when they were...
That went into the window to show that you had a son in service. And the blue star meant service, and then there was the gold star that meant you had lost a son
in service. Right. So
some of the other uniforms, this is both an airborne on the right and infantryman on the left, and just a small sampling of the equipment that they would carry with them.
But they're displayed so people can really appreciate. And then you mentioned some of
we do, and this is the stuff that would have been carried in the pockets, different books and stuff, personal items.
Of course, it looks like a pack of cigarettes.
There is a pair of Lucky Strike cigarettes in there, as well as a pair of playing cards, eating utensils. We have a picture of soldiers reading a guidebook to Paris. As they're doing the invasion, and we actually have that book there.
Great. Now we're into some of the standing displays.
This is some of our static displays. This is the assayer's office. This would have been who you would have taken a lead sample or an ore sample to for them to tell you what percentage of profitable ore was in that dirt sample. Okay. And they would smelt it down, and we've got a lot of things. The desk that you can see there is called a Wooten desk. And it's actually a fairly rare artifact, and it is the first desk that was designed to be used for an office setting. The Nelson at Kansas City has one that's, I will admit, is a little fancier than mine, but they're quite a rare little thing to find. And we have a lot of things tied to the Victorian era and the early area of Joplin. This is the House of Lords, which was a restaurant, a bar, and a gambling center, as well as a brothel. down where Spiva Park is on Main Street.
So you saved a lot of the artifacts, or got some of the artifacts.
We do. We have actually the roulette wheel that you saw is actually from the House of Lords. We have the safe from the House of Lords on there. This is the McGee Drugstore, which would have been on 9th and Main, and this was actually a very popular stop for high school students back in the 50s and 60s, because at that time there was an open lunch policy where you could leave campus for lunch, and they would walk over to this drugstore. And I believe there's a picture. I don't see it. I think it's off frame there, but it shows all of the high school kids in there for the lunch. And we actually had one lady from that time saying that their egg salad was one of the best.
Remembered the food that they enjoyed while they were there. Yeah. Circus display is something that you're well known for.
This is something that is the Anchenson Circus, and every figure in there is hand carved in that little miniature circus. And Joplin has an active circus enthusiast group called the Merle Evans, who was actually Ringling Brother Circus band leader for years. The Merle Evans Tent 27, and they're the ones that host this in our museum. It was Ned and Helen Anchenson, and like I said, this was his hobby. He would carve these little things and hand paint all of them.
A lot of time went into that.
Yeah. Oh yes.
Appreciation.
Yes.
And then the artwork.
And then we have our clown display, and I still cannot think of the artist's name.
But
I'm just drawing a blank on it.
Some recognizable faces in the clown that people follow the circus.
What's funny is we actually have a black and white photo of that clown. That was his favorite person with the Ringling Brothers Circus. And on the other wall is the actual black and white photo of that.
What it was like.
This is going back. This is a Victorian parlor. The ladies on the side. We actually work with Southern every 2 years in the textile collection. People from the textile department in the theater come out and do hands-on work in our collections.
So with the preservation?
Cataloging. And this is an item that they put together, these three ladies standing there, and you're not supposed to take that as three different people. That is the different layers that one lady would wear.
Wow.
And also I'd point out too, this is a summer outfit.
So we're on this 90-degree temperature now.
Yes, it's made light and breezy for the wonderful Joplin summer temperatures.
So 100 or so plus years ago, it was really a different world for them to be able to dress and deal with it. Fire engine, also something very recognizable.
The fire engine. This is a 1927 America LaFrance fire engine. Joplin was one of the first, if not the first, fire department to go to a mechanized truck system for putting out fires. Before that, it was all done by horse and buggy. Joplin's only lost 2 firefighters in the line of duty over the course of its existence, and one of them actually died while driving this truck to a fire when he hit a curb and it overturned and killed him.
Probably the roads weren't in the greatest conditions.
No, but especially if you think about going into some of the older neighborhoods, how high the curbs are, and you can see there's absolutely no concessions to safety as far as safety belts.
You're just out on the open driving.
There's not even a cage or roof to hold you. You're just out in the open, because the people who built these things built wagons and carriages before that. So those weren't things they really thought about.
So it gives you appreciation of what it was like and how, the challenges they faced.
And this one really is a jewel in the collection. It's I believe the oldest survivor for the America LaFrance Company. At one time they offered to buy it back from the city for an exorbitant price, and the city turned it down. That was also punishment for the firefighters. It was disciplinary, was they had to go and they had to polish.
The firefighters had to keep it in good shape and tying it together. We mentioned the city, and some of our viewers might be curious about the relationship between the museum and the city.
Well, the museum is partially funded by the city of Joplin. They account for a portion of our budget, and part of the collection, the mineral collection, belongs to the city of Joplin. The historical collection belongs to the Joplin Historical Society. And both coexist under the Joplin Museum to display these artifacts for the benefit of the public.
Now you have opportunities for people to support through the Historical Society or
We do. As always, you can become a member. You can also come and volunteer to do some work with the museum, be it in preservation or just in dealing with visitors.
So you have people who can maybe help tour or give, guides.
Exactly. And then, once again, we're always looking for artifacts and stories that we can include in our displays, and also help preserve this history of our area.
Now, one thing we haven't told people is the times you're open, and I know you mentioned, you know, your location, Schifferdecker Park.
We are in Schifferdecker Park on 7th and Schifferdecker Avenue. We've been there for 88 years, so it's pretty easy to find. You just say, where's the, usually people call us the Mineral Museum, and they'll know where we are.
Because that's what it started out originally.
Yes, originally. And our hours are, we're open from Tuesday, from 10 to 7 on Tuesday, and then Wednesday through Saturday from 10 to 5.
Okay. And also, I know during the school year you get a lot of school groups that really.
We do. Well. We see. We usually tour through at least every R8 4th grade class comes through our walls, and then we have all the outlying school districts too that come in and do their tours during the spring. It gets a little hectic in spring.
Well, I know when I was looking at your website and information, and one of the things I saw it stressed that one of the philosophy or the goals is said to inspire and engage. So a museum's more than just look at something and keep on walking by. You want to engage.
No,
people.
we do. We try and interact with as many people as possible and try and find out what it is they're interested in. And you know, I'm a history nerd from way back, and I have a love for a lot of these different artifacts. And when we have someone comes in and shows an interest, I mean, that's the worst thing you can do in a museum is show interest, because we've been waiting for someone to talk to you for years. You go out and you get to talk to these people and kind of just the joy of sharing your knowledge and this special thing.
Right, something that they haven't seen before.
That you found. So
tying that together. And you, as director, then you work with your volunteers and your staff, and then you have a board that helps with the operations.
Yes, we have a board that's appointed by the City of Joplin that oversees the entire museum. And then, like I said earlier, the Historical Society has its own separate board that deals with some display issues and stuff in the museum also.
Great. Well, what do you enjoy the most? I know you've been with the museum even before you became director. What do you enjoy the most?
This is my 22nd year at the museum. I was curator for 20-some years, and I've just now been director for a little over 2. I don't know. I mean, it's my favorite thing. The museum changes as time goes on. In the beginning, it was the locking myself in the basement and going through all the old stuff and the different artifacts and just seeing what we had and doing research and learning on. But as time goes on, I think the thing I enjoy the most about the museum is the people who come out and share bits of their history with us, because you learn things that you would never know. My father was just a average teenager in the 50s here, but he always had stories, and you know, we get questions all the time about where was this, and we just had a person come in and want to know that when he was young, they used to go play in a place called Bacon Hill. And I started thinking that'd be such a perfect question for my father, because he knew all of that esoteric slang terms for stuff. But yeah, you start to think that you know quite a bit about Joplin, and then you meet someone and you find out you don't really know all that much.
So there's a lot of history there beyond the museum walls.
There is, yeah.
Throughout the community. Well, Chris, I'd like to thank you very much for visiting today and sharing with our audience.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
You're welcome. And I'd like to thank you, the viewers, for joining us this week on Newsmakers. I'm Judy Stiles. We'll see you again next week at the same time on this station.